It is that time of the week, Sharon Yankowitz, over the rainbow.
Ed, you're a very busy guy, Mark Silverman.
You have no idea. I won't even bore you because it'd make me tired just talking about it. But we've got a
very interesting lineup today.
Yeah, surprisingly so. I mean, when I first looked at the names, I was like, yeah, okay. All right. And then some of them really grabbed me.
I had the same experience. And then as I was researching some of the names, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. So there were a couple of names where I really got into it, and I had to start editing myself because, otherwise you would have had to do it for me, and we both don't like that. So
well, let's start off with somebody that was surprisingly in the news quite a bit recently, or was on my radar screen quite a bit recently. For instance, I was listening.
Why is that?
Well, I was listening to the Gilbert Gottfried podcast, and
okay.
they were talking about the movie Over the Moon, the biopic of Andy Kaufman. George Shapiro.
I had that. Yep.
Was the manager for, among others, Andy Kaufman. He was portrayed by Danny DeVito in the movie, and they were talking about him. And there was something else that
interesting.
Plus, I've been binge watching, as you know, I've been binge watching Seinfeld. I'm almost to the end.
Just the fact that you said Danny DeVito was Andy Kaufman was a very interesting casting decision.
No. He played George Shapiro. Jim Carrey portrayed Andy Kaufman.
That's better.
And his audition was insane because what he did, because it was a heavy competition to play Kaufman. What Jim Carrey had done was he took clips of Kaufman's famous SNL appearances and Carson appearances, and then yes, and did Mighty Mouse. As a matter of fact, the clip switched, and it was Jim Carrey doing Mighty Mouse on. I mean, he literally had a home theater, and it was he had invited the producers to see this sitting in the home theater, and it took them a minute to realize that was no longer Andy Kaufman. It was Jim Carrey.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, no, that's a much better. I was thinking, that would have been very interesting.
Now Shapiro follows a pattern that I noticed. We often see patterns in our featured stories. And the one that jumped out at me might be the same, might be different than the one that jumped out at you. When he was 12, Carl Reiner married into his family. Right. He had a huge foot in the door. Then went then followed the How to Succeed in Business route, working the mailroom at William Morris, which led into becoming an agent, which led into him becoming what you were talking about, almost like a page, escorting celebrities to various shows.
Exactly.
And being their right hand.
And another New Yorker. He was a Bronx boy.
Well, aren't they all? And,
no.
And then he started, the shows.
Well, I thought also it was very interesting. I thought that, one of his first assignments after he got out of the mailroom, I think he was a junior producer, or one of his first assignments was to accompany Elvis Presley during his appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Right.
I was like, wow, that's really getting a leg up.
So, so when you look and you see who was affiliated with shows like Steve Allen, like That Girl, like Dick Van Dyke, and work with Mary Tyler Moore and Carol Channing, it's not a huge leap. And then, as we mentioned, Andy Kaufman.
Don't leave out Gomer Pyle.
Did I? I didn't mean to. It's not. He packaged, and it had to work. But putting the Seinfeld, he was the producer behind Seinfeld. And it was no easy task to get that show on the air. You're not a huge fan, but
no.
And his contacts and his experience in the industry by then, now it's 20 something years of experience. by the time when Seinfeld first came on, it was the Seinfeld Chronicles. It was a late season, came on in April, 4 episodes, and didn't do great. Seinfeld was an up-and-coming stand-up. I had seen him years earlier in the city. I was a big fan already. And he was making the talk show circuit, but he wasn't, in the top orbit yet of stand-up. Got the show, and it was literally about nothing. 4 episodes. The next year, it didn't make the full schedule. They put on 8 more episodes, and I think they put on 8 more episodes. It might have even been in the summer, which is usually when network TV is just burning stuff off. They put on 8 more episodes, if I remember correctly, and it did well enough that by then it morphed into, by the 4th season, it was the hit that it has become. But when he did all this, he had already left William Morris, right?
Oh, yeah. No, by now he's full-time packaging shows and movies. Right. And when he left, he became a personal manager and producer with a childhood friend named Howard West. And they formed their own production, Shapiro West. And that's when he started representing stars like Jerry Seinfeld and Uncle Carl and Andy. And, then you mentioned, of course, the movie. And then he had a cameo in a movie as Mr. Besserman. Do you know about that?
Nah, but his cameos are nothing. They were just
but I think cameos can be quite interesting when, like Alfred Hitchcock, right? He never had any lines in his movies, but you always found him somewhere, whether it be in a park.
Oh, yeah, but that was his trademark, and that's the joy of being a director. I mean, his cameo was in Man on the Moon, where, he was portrayed. That has to be weird. When you have an actor playing George Shapiro, and you have George Shapiro in the movie, right? It's kind of funny.
Maybe that's why he did it.
Well, of course it is. It was his movie. He was making the movie. He worked his way up. Now he had like I said, he had a huge opportunity, but he spent his life putting together quality TV, quality movies with quality performers. He had access to and recognized great talent, but he also helped package that talent, helping them get that opportunities, putting them.
The word revered came up in a few articles that I read, that he was a revered talent agent.
So the one thing that I seem to notice as a pattern is the early commitment to an industry and living their life in that industry. The other, this was a little fuzzy. It says here, and you'll maybe look at the same thing, he was married to Melody to his death, talked about three children, but it also mentions someone who was married to that till 1983. So I don't know what happened to his marriage to Diane Barnett that ended in 1983. And I don't know when he married Melody. Right. But it seems like they were together a very long time. And I find that and I like that.
You find that intriguing, huh? He also he was a founding member of the National Comedy Center's Advisory Board.
Well, yeah, again, it was his life. He devoted himself to it, and he was a huge influence in the industry, and to be admired.
Yes, he was.
And again, just like we've talked about, there are several that you don't seem to hear negative stuff.
And then they're connected, and then you're looking into it, and they're connected to everything. You're like, oh, and like the light bulbs are popping off everywhere.
Yeah. Now, so George Shapiro doesn't fall into someone I had never heard of, and turned out he was influential.
Yeah, I had never heard of him.
But I've always followed those circles more. So,
right.
Next is, and this one's an indulgence for me. Thank you.
Yes, you have a friend here who made it as an honoree. Condolences for
we did Spider Cantley last week, who was associated with KGO through the Curathon. That's the problem when you have a station that was successful for 50 years, and it's now 15 years later than that. the audience and the talent all gets older.
So so when you brought her name up to me, and of course I had never heard of her, I thought, oh, I'll get a little ditty on her, and and then I'll let you take it away. But she actually was one of those types of things that I got more information on her than I thought I would. She actually was a former school and physical education teacher. I knew when I first looked at her, it was like, the first thing that popped into my mind was like a Jane Fonda type video thing where you stand in front of the front of the room, whatever that they're taping, and she leads the class, whatever. But it wasn't really just as simple as that with her, I don't think. She's from your area, right? She was San Francisco all the way, late 70s. People are talking about, let's see, she did appearances with students, right? And she was like on a local show, and then she did so well on the local show that she ended up being able to launch her own show called The Morning Stretch. So I'm imagining she was like one of these like 5 o'clock in the morning type.
No, the show is more a local Regis Kathy Lee type show.
So it was on a little later than
it was probably on 7 to 10 or something like that. Right. Yeah, it wasn't super early.
Right. So she made her television debut in 1982, and the show ran until 1995. It moved to cable, where it remained until 2000. Do you know why she stopped doing it?
I don't, but she was very high energy. I know her from KGO Radio, where she hosted a weekly show on fitness.
Well, it said, in my notes that, interestingly enough, that while she was doing this show, none other than Elaine Powers caught her eye, and from what I read, she hired her as the company's fitness program director, and then her role was to develop work regimens and travel the country to promote Elaine Powers fitness salons. So I actually did have a membership to Elaine Powers at one point. Sold over 10 million copies of her exercise video. She was the founder of Fit Camps, which I'm not sure what that is. If you do, you can tell us about that.
Oh, but I don't know directly, but I'm guessing it's a kind of spelling for fat camp.
Yeah, it says, which features fat flush programs, and I don't know what a flush program is, unless it's like refers to like these liquid diets that sort of are supposed to flush you out, I guess.
I'd be surprised. One thing I always liked about Joanie is she was never like one of these super fringe extremist types.
Right.
So she wasn't preaching anything that was just bizarre and out there and only eat the very tip of an asparagus twice a day. And, she wasn't preaching.
But was she into, some of these people, because I've been trying to lose weight for about, I've had bouts with my weight on and off for about 30 years now. And, sometimes you go to nutritionists or people who do exercise. Some of them want you to just, along with exercise, they have these powdered drinks and whatnot. Was she into any of that?
Not that I know of. I'll tell you a quick thing about those powdered drinks. I had the station where I had my show. They were very into that crap. But here's the thing. And they tried to get me to sell it. And I wouldn't. But here's the thing about that. So, for instance, one of the people got me to at least, why don't you just try a couple? So it's this one thing, you pour the powder into yogurt, you add some fruit, you add some honey, and you blend it, blah, 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 blah. And if you do that every day for a month, instead of like bacon and eggs and the other things that we have for breakfast,
right?
You're going to lose weight and you'll feel better. Now, here's the thing. They were right. I did it. And I did lose weight. And I did feel good.
And it wasn't because you stopped eating bacon and eggs for breakfast?
Exactly. No, you see, that's the thing. If you took yogurt, honey, and fruit, blended it, and ate that for 30 days, you would have the same effect. Now, the powdered stuff.
Yeah.
I'm no expert, but I looked at the ingredients. The ingredients were almost virtually identical in every way to the adult multivitamin I would get at Costco. Okay.
How about that?
Here's the thing. The adult multivitamin at Costco is about $10, and I think it comes 1,000 pills, which is a 3-year supply. This powdered stuff is $30 for a 1-month supply.
That sounds about right.
Okay, but here's the thing though. If I did want to spin it, if I did want to rationalize selling it to make some money, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Eat yogurt, yogurt, fruit, honey, blend it together. Maybe you do it, maybe you don't. But if you're going to spend $30 for this program, you've got skin in the game. You're now invested. So where you might do the yogurt, honey, fruit periodically, if you just drop $30, you're going to do it every day. You know what I'm saying? You're more committed. No. You're more committed to the idea. Now, but think about it for a second. If you had a weight and health program that for under $400 a year, you could consistently lose, say, 5 pounds a month and keep it off. That's pretty good. That is a pretty good result for not an exorbitant amount of money. So, con or not, if that $400 gets you invested in the program, there is a value to that. So, but that has nothing to do with Joanie Greggains. And she was not like that. She was more mainstream, and that's what I liked about her. I don't think I would have been able to work with somebody who was fringe nut. And frankly, I don't think my station would have put on somebody that was fringe nut. Right. Joanie was just high energy, strong personality, never had a bad thing to say about anybody. Everybody loved Joanie Greggains. And it was the times I got to work with her were a blast.
Did she have good things to say about the twice impeached president?
Oh God, she was she was off the air well before he came into existence.
Okay,
and I was unaffiliated with the station well before he came into existence.
I had to throw
it. She would not have nice things to say about the twice impeached president. I'm going to take that for granted.
How old was she? And
no idea.
I didn't see. Yeah, they didn't say anything about how she died or how old she was.
Both seemed conspicuously absent.
Yes,
I would have to say she was probably 70-ish because she was certainly older than I was, older than we are, and she'd been around. She had, she was good. She didn't look it. When last time I saw her. It's funny. I would describe her as a Suzanne Summers type, and then I see that's how she was exactly described when she broke in, was as a Suzanne Summers type.
Well, how old is Suzanne Summers? Do you know?
Oh God, Suzanne Summers was in American Graffiti, which it came out in like 1972. That's 50 years ago. Suzanne Summers has to be well into her 70s. So I would think that Joanie is somewhere in that neighborhood.
Sounds like a good guess. Anything else?
I did have a couple of interesting guests.
Go for
experience when she was when I was producing the show.
Did you interviewed her?
No, I was her producer.
Oh, okay.
I was somebody who produced for her periodically. At a certain point in the station, I was super sub. I could fill in on any show with any host and hit it out of the park. So, and I was available. So that the station loved to use me, and I worked with every single host, sometimes for extended period of time. So, when their regular producers were gone for weeks, I would fill in I had some assignments that lasted for months. But I got to work with Joanie many, many times over the years. I think probably for a number of reasons, the guest that jumps out the most for me was Jack LaLanne. Do you remember Jack LaLanne?
Sure. Yeah, my dad was a big fan of his. Okay. He was a big member over there at Jack LaLanne on Flatbush Avenue. And every morning before he went to school to teach.
When I'm 4 years old, my grandmother watched Jack LaLanne on TV.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And she and I would be with our mats We did Jack LaLanne exercises, and then there was a yoga guy, Richard Hittleman. We did yoga with Richard Hittleman. But I watched and exercised to Jack LaLanne when I was 4 with my grandmother, like 1963, 64.
I don't know that name, Richard. No, the only Richard that I recall is, what's that fagula's name?
Oh, Richard Simmons.
Simmons, yes.
No, Richard Hittleman was completely different. But in any event, so now that's 1963, 64. So now we're in, I started KGO in probably 93, 94 type of thing. So this is probably sometime before 2000.
Okay.
Almost 40 years later. And Jack LaLanne is a phone interview with us. So I call the house. And my first kick was his wife answered. Hello, this is Elaine. I said, LaLanne? Are you serious? She goes, yeah, I know. Okay. So now we have Jack LaLanne. I have Jack LaLanne on the phone. And before we go on the air, I said, Jack, I probably was green enough to call him Mr. LaLanne. I have to tell you, I used to do exercise. I used to do your exercises with my grandmother on her living room floor. And he said, if I had your grandmother on the living room floor, I would do a whole lot more than stretching.
Oh, my.
And I'm like, oh, my God. All of a sudden, I'm 4 years old again. And my grandmother is stretching on the floor. And I'm getting images in my mind that one should never, ever have.
Of the grandmother of Jacqueline doing push-ups over grandma.
and I mean, this is a guy who I wouldn't say I worshipped or idolized, but, you're 4, he's on TV. It's like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's Batman, it's Superman, and he's hitting on my grandmother who was 60 then.
Oh, and it was bare minimum to that show because he always was like, there was nothing to it. It was him and a chair.
Right. So now it got worse or better. A few minutes later, he's on the air with Joanie, and she says something about, so what do you think about those little blue pills? And now he's on the air and he goes, I don't need those little blue pills. I got wood that a woodchuck would break his teeth on. I'm like, this is Jack LaLanne, for crying out loud. Now, I got to meet him about
Jack LaLanne's a dirty old man.
Yes. I got to meet him about 2 or 3 years later because what he would do, and he did for years, he would come out to San Francisco Bay. He would swim to Alcatraz, but he wouldn't just swim to Alcatraz. He was towing rowboats behind him. And he was towing one rowboat for each year. So when he was 85, he had 85 rowboats he was towing when he swam to Alcatraz. I met him. By then he was towing 90 rowboats to Alcatraz about 3 years before he died.
90 rowboats, oy vey.
Yeah, he was impressive. I'm not sure then, but I seem to think I might have said to him, you really shocked me when you started hitting on my grandmother.
What did Joanie have to say?
Well, with the Viagra thing, she just kind of moved on to another topic rather quickly. Okay. But she wasn't shaken by it at all. So, one of the themes that we have, we actually have a cross section of where they fall in are too old or too young. George Shapiro, Jack LaLanne. George Shapiro, definitely a ripe old age. Joanie, an indistinguished, but probably too young. Now we have a football player.
Marion Barber, 38. But one of the things I had noticed is along through our journey today, we'll find a lot of people who, undisclosed death or death unknown. And, with Joanie, like you say, it was conspicuously absent that they didn't mention her age or the cause of her death. And with Marion Barber, it says death was unknown.
You know what, though? I go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, again, this sort of story, it was more I got out of it than I thought, but it hit me in a way because, first of all, very young guy. The articles, I read 2 or 3 of them, started out with his accolades, right? He was, he was nicknamed Marion the Barbarian. It sounds a little like Ron's, like Sterling, John Sterling, who makes up names about the Yankee players. He played 7 years in the NFL. Most of them, it looks like, for the Cowboys, but there are a couple other teams in there. I think he played for the Bears for a season or 2. Let's see. He's hailed for his 2-time yard run during a 2007 Cowboys game against the Patriots that made NFL history for bringing the ball out of the end zone just in time to keep their opposing team from a touchdown. Okay. Do you know, when I read stuff like that, because I don't know football, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it sounds like a good thing. I know what a touchdown is. I'm not exactly sure. Is the end zone, I guess, is that because the field is cut up into 4 quarters? So I guess the end zone would be that quarter that's closest to. Yeah, so you're shaking.
No, the end zone is the goal line. It's
right. It's
that space area past the goal line. So you've got this goal line, you've got that goal line, and you've got 100-yard field in the middle. So once you cross the goal line, you scored a touchdown or.
So what did he do? He sort of stopped the goal from the other team and then ran the whole field.
No, he was carrying kickoffs.
Ah, okay. Said he finished his. What are rushing yards, Mark?
Carries. So in other words, you can pass the ball or you can have the ball handed off.
All right. Well, so that's impressive. 4,780 rushing yards.
The thing that I'm a little bit, unfortunately, I'm a little bit more cynical about some of the things that Warren said. It seemed that everywhere he went, there was some friction or some trouble. Some
on the teams.
Yeah, either not following rules or being somewhat disruptive. Then there's some not huge. I mean, there have been some players post-career who've been much worse. But he's had some domestic scrapes. He's had some other run-ins as law.
It seems like after he retired, he was one of these athletes that just absolutely went down the wrong path.
Well, that's just it. I don't know if it was after he retired. It might have led to the reason he had a 7-year career. And unfortunately, again, the cynic in me, when I hear a 38-year-old dies at home of undisclosed causes, the 2 things that come to my mind: drugs or suicide. And they say there's nothing that indicates that yet.
Suicide. Well, I mean, it says he had mental health issues. He was hospitalized twice for it.
And I'm not. I guess I'm not. Well, I am being critical of the family, although I'm not saying they refused to have his brain autopsy. Many players, they're finding more and more. They're doing more. Many players are insisting on autopsies after they die, and are donating their brains to science for that reason.
Because of all the head collisions.
Yes, there have been at least 2 players that I can think of that literally committed suicide by killing themselves, like shooting themselves in the gut, for the purpose of preserving their brain. Where things got so hard and the pain got so great and the issues got so that they ended it, but they ended it in a way they thought the brain injuries from football were leading to their issues and their demise. Gotcha. So it also bothers me that the family is refusing to allow that.
Well, I mean, this guy was, seemed to have had issues from early 2012, 2014. He was arrested in 2019 in an alleged incident where he damage to cars by running into them.
Yeah.
Like he ran, with his body, not like with another car. And it said the witness that saw him charge toward their vehicle, causing large dents to the side of their cars.
To be honest with you, Sharon, and if you have more that.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, what could he have been on that would make him want to run at a car?
This is frankly, I'm not celebrating his death in any way. I'm not saying he deserved to die, but this is not really, just on the little bit I see and the little bit I know, not a death I want to spend a personality that I want to spend a lot more time, quote unquote, celebrating. I'd rather move on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, I felt like he was worth, because he was so young, because he was talented. He was definitely worth more than just a mere mention.
All right. Well, he got more than a mention.
Yeah, we're good. We got some real threads to each other right now. Alan White. Again, it doesn't say what he died from. It said he had a brief illness. Alan White was the drummer for the Yes Band. And again, I wasn't, and then I started reading. And then I had to start editing myself because, wow.
Yeah. Now, I have to tell you, when we talk about somebody who should have been more famous, who should have been famous and wasn't.
Definitely.
And I'm getting, there's probably people who, when you say Alan White, they instantly know. I would never have recognized the name.
Me either. And I love the drums, right? I should know.
Right. I'm almost tempted to rename our should have been famous segment, the Alan White segment. This guy to me is the poster child. I mean, what I mentioned earlier with George Shapiro, this is a guy who literally started his career drumming when he was about 13, and before he was 20 was working with people like John Lennon, Yoko Ono, Eric Clapton, as almost a kid. I mean, to me that was amazing.
George Harrison, Steve Winwood, amazing.
When he eventually joined Yes, after their original drummer left very early on.
Yep.
He was turning down offers from, it was Jethro Tull, and who was the other? It was another major band that wanted him to join at the same time. And he was so this is a guy.
Yeah, and he was replacing an original member of Yes, Bill Bruford. So that was, it's hard to step into somebody else's shoes like that, and he did it quite well.
Jethro Tull in America wanted him when he accepted the offer from Yes. I mean, so this is a guy who started his career when he was 13. By the time he was 20, he was a full professional, in demand, studio work, filling in for major bands.
He was like a sixth Beatle too, right? Like he worked with the Beatles.
Oh, I never saw anything that he worked with the Beatles. He worked with John. He worked with Lennon. No, he worked with Lennon. He worked with George Harrison.
Yeah, no, he was on Lennon's record. He was on one of Lennon's records.
Yes, he was.
With the Beatles.
No, not. I don't think it was with the Beatles. It was. It was Imagine. It was the one where Imagine. He was featured on Imagine, which was just Lennon and Yoko. Was the Yoko on whatever they call the Yoko Ono band?
Yeah.
I am quite certain he never did. And I'm quite certain he never did anything with the Beatles. John Lennon, the Plastic Ono Band, George Harrison, yes, nothing with the Beatles. The Beatles were dissolved by the time he was working with these people. He worked with Beatles. He never worked with the Beatles. He never worked with Paul McCartney. He never worked with Ringo Starr. He never worked with the four of them. As
not what I have.
Okay. You'll have to find it for me because I'm looking at his list, his complete discography here. He had one solo. He worked with the Alan Triset, John Lennon. He worked with John Lennon and George Harrison before he started working with Yes. And then he did 40-odd albums with Yes. And he worked with all sorts of Donovan, Gary Wright, Chris Squire from Yes. But he would just be able to go into a studio and fill in for somebody and pick up an entire repertoire in a couple of days. He was just an outright pure professional and a pure drummer who could do virtually anything. And he did it for his life. He was...
Yeah, he definitely did. All right, what I'm reading here is...
Go ahead.
I guess I misread it. It said it's not every day a Beatle calls you and changes your life forever. Right. And that's what happened to Alan White.
Right.
And then after a while, he actually became Lennon's go-to guy.
Right.
And
he
worked with George Harrison.
He was inducted into the Hall of Fame when he was in 2017.
17, yeah.
He was married again. One of the other things. So he started young, worked his profession for his entire life, like Shapiro, and was married to his wife for 40 years. I mean, you don't think of rock and rollers being in stable relationships. How many relationships has Mick Jagger had? You know, virtually all the Beatles.
And I don't even get that one. Yeah.
Yeah, all the Beatles are married 2 or 3 times. You think rock and rollers, and you're thinking sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Is it George? No, it was
George remarried.
John. Yeah,
John remarried. Paul remarried. Twice. At least he was dead when he was 38.
Do you think with the way that he was connected to Ono, do you really think he would have left her?
I'm just saying that even, you think Beatles and you think the good boys of rock and roll, even they didn't have 40-year marriages.
Was it George Harrison who was married to Linda?
No, that was Paul. And George Harrison's wife ended up marrying Eric Clapton, and George was in the wedding party. So, it's just to be married for 40 years to the same woman anyway is impressive. To be in rock career and be married to the same woman, I just think it's a standout. The saddest thing that I saw was 2 weeks before his death, it says many of his personal items and musical instruments were stolen from his storage unit. And I think that's very, very sad. 2 weeks before he died, the drum kit from the Plastic Ono band sessions was stolen. That is like especially sad. But again, I'm just blown away by somebody who worked with such prominent artists and had such an impact and did it for, if he was 13 when he started playing, that's 60 years as a drummer, and he died at 72. That's impressive to me. That's just impressive to me.
Yeah, but he probably wasn't one of those household names because of the people that the superstars that he did work with kind of probably overshadowed him.
I know you weren't a fan of Spinal Tap, but one of the running gags in Spinal Tap was and it's based on The Who and Led Zeppelin, how the drummers always seem to die young. They had a drummer. He died when he choked on vomit in Spinal Tap, and the medical exam revealed it wasn't his vomit. It just became another drummer spontaneously combusted on stage. It just became a running gag. But this is a drummer who lived and he died now, but he died after a full life.
Right.
But he's in that at 72. He's in that sweet spot.
And then, is that all you have to? Is that all you
Yeah, I
have
think
on
so.
it?
I'm just extreme.
We
Like
can
I said,
we can move on to Andy Fletcher, who was only 60, and again, death undisclosed. He was the keyboardist and founding member of Depeche Mode. That's another band I really didn't have an appreciation for. There are some songs I like, but my best friend used to run off the concerts. Anytime he was at Madison Square Garden, you could find Tara at the Garden.
I don't know that he would take this the wrong way to some extent. And again, I really couldn't tell you who Andy Fletcher was. But as I'm reading the profile, he's almost the opposite of Alan White. Because where Alan White was a dominant, respected drummer, Andy Fletcher, even the way he described it was...
Yeah, he wasn't really a musician. He was more of an entertainer.
Yeah, he was never the other guy.
He didn't even think, I mean, from what I read, he had a nice voice, but he didn't even think he could sing.
He didn't sing. I think he had barely any singing credits. The one time... the couple of times he sang on stage during larger performance numbers, they said his mic was really turned down low into the mix. He really didn't sing. He didn't have any songwriting. He was the only member of the band who had no songwriting credit.
No, but he did. Yeah, but they didn't have a manager. And so he sort of took care of that sort of thing. He handled many of the band's business, legal, and other non-musical interests. And he generally was interested in many of the other business aspects of the music industry. And he shied away from anything to do with like actual singing. But he was a performer. He was an entertainer. So his thing was not the studio thing. His thing was like on stage, and something would come over him, and he would just act out and just let it roll.
And where Alan White performed with many bands, Andy Fletcher apparently helped many bands with the business side of things more than perform. But I just like I said, he didn't describe himself almost any differently. Although the other thing in this he was apparently a top-notch chess player.
Yeah,
which,
and he also
supports the whole business aspect.
Yes,
he was the brains rather than
right. And he would set up the gigs, and apparently he liked to do remixes in his sets. Before that was really a thing. Like when you would do a mix, he was doing that. So there was he was very involved with the synth pop, electronic, and new wave. He was sort of like a pioneer with all of that. And it said something about he considered synth pop, electric, and new wave with the band, including former members Clark and Alan Wilder, and he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2020.
I don't know if it would be fair to call him a pioneer because he comes into the industry in the 80s already, and by then you'd already had bands like Yes, and especially Emerson, Lake and Palmer in the early 70s, introducing synthesizers.
I guess, but it wasn't. I guess he helped commercialize it.
Yeah, where the synthesizers that Emerson used were complex and elaborate, the equivalent of computers that filled a room, where we're now looking at tablets and phones that have more computing power than NASA had.
Right.
By the time he's working with synthesizers, rather than being an unusual thing, they're now being mainstream. If I got it correctly, Depeche Mode only used various synthesizers as opposed to guitars and brass and drums and all that. It was all synthesized. So it wouldn't have revolutionized synthesizers, but used them in a different way, is I think a fairer way to say it. And the other common theme, and it said he did not undisclosed, he said he died of natural causes, which is different.
Well, right, but we still don't know.
Natural causes, people die.
You know what? When I read that, I just heard your voice. Well, he had to die from something.
No, I don't agree with that. But he was married to his wife for 30 years. Guy dies at 16, married to his wife for 30 years. I'm impressed. Thumbs up from me. So, Andy Fletcher, I'm going to let you do the next one because you're so good at pronouncing names.
Krishna Kumar Kunat, otherwise known as KK.
And that's the only way he's going to be referred to.
Very young guy, 53 years old, cardiac.
इतना प्यार दिया मैं जब भी जहां भी कड़ी धूप में था तेरी जुल्फ ने.
For me, I mean, again, this is another artist I had never heard of, but it popped up, and and this is like something that one of these types of researches you do, that when you get in there, you're like, oh, so I thought, what, we're doing some musicians. He's not probably somebody that our listeners are very familiar with, but I did grab a song that the article mentioned, and I went and listened to it. Didn't understand a thing he was saying, but the music was good, and he has a nice voice. From what I read, he was very popular in the romantic genre.
Oh, yeah, he's a star in Bollywood.
Yes, he's a star in Bollywood. I'm not a big fan of Bollywood, but having taught at one point ESL adults, ran into many students who were very much fans of Bollywood. He was born in Delhi, I think it was Delhi, in 1968, and considered to be a versatile singer. You know what, this is, I guess, because that I was a teacher that taught English to people of other languages. What struck me about him was that he actually sang in many languages. He sang in Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Marathi, Bengali, and many more languages. I don't want
to minimize, I don't know that you can minimize Bollywood, given that U.S. has a population about 300 and something million people, and India has a population that's 4 times greater. So if he's a star in India, he's a way bigger star than anybody in the United States.
Oh, without a doubt. And he began his career doing jingles. How many people get started doing jingles? He was a playback singer. His songs were dubbed over films with the actors lip syncing along. He also released 2 studio albums. This is sort of like where I grabbed this song and went to listen to it. 2 studio albums, if our listeners want to go find it, 1999's Pal and 2008's Humsafar. And he worked as a judge and a mentor on a reality singing show. So maybe their version of Bollywood's Got Talent, something of that. His songs were said to reflect a wide range of emotions, and it just sort of struck a chord with people. And how some music is sort of aimed at a certain generation. It seemed that, from what I read, his songs didn't target a particular age group, and it said that his music just sort of struck a chord with people of all ages. So I thought that was pretty cool stuff.
So then we move on to another guy who I never heard of.
Ronnie Hawkins. Now rockabilly I like, and I didn't know I liked rockabilly until I became a DJ. So Ronnie Hawkins promoted himself as the king of rockabilly.
I mean, the kind of a woman make a fool of you. She make a young man groan and an old man pain. Way she took my money was a crying shame. Mary Lou. She took my diamond ring. Mary Lou. She took my watch and chain. Mary Lou. She took the keys to my Cadillac car, jumped in my kitty and she drove afar, left me stranded in a Kalamazoo, making her a fortune.
And his name was Rompin Ronnie. That sort of reminded me how Michael Jackson dubbed himself the king of pop. So there's this group. Okay, do you know? You had to have seen Dumbo, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you know how in Dumbo where he meets up with the crows and they all sing.
Mm-hmm.
That the voices of those crows were all voiced by members of the band.
Right.
And Ronnie Hawkins was most notable for assembling a group of 5 musicians who would later become the band.
And he was part of one of the most famous and original rock documentaries on the breakup of the band. Right.
And, I mean, and this is how I started learning about genres too, I found that music and cooking have a lot of similarities in the way that you can blend styles, right? You can blend styles of music, you can blend cultures. That's what fusion is, right? And in this case, rockabilly is described as country music blended, right? Well, rock and roll came from the blues, everybody knows that. As a rockabilly is sort of like a little bit of blues with some rock and roll and a dash of country, is the way that I'm looking at it. So he did a 6-month stint in the Army, and he fronted up. He was, everybody has people who inspire them, right? Even Elvis. One of the things about Elvis was he was inspired by the black musicians.
Right.
So he fronted a group of black musicians, calling it the Black Hawks, which was about as long that they lasted about as long as his career in the military. And after he was released from service, he was always hunting for talent and constantly changing the lineup. And he was one of these sort of nomads, He recorded several demos at Sun Studio, and that didn't sell very well. He was competing with acts like Conway Twitty and Bo Diddley and Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah, he was appearing with them also. What I found most, when we talk about the themes, again, Ronnie Hawkins grew up in the industry. His family were already established country stars. He was born in 1935, and in the 40s, he's working with Roy Rogers, for crying out loud. He's a teenager. So he's working with Roy Rogers. He's working with and co-appearing with people like Bo Diddley and Conway Twitty.
Right. And
so he got into that business at a very early age.
It also says that, he also felt like he didn't have like the best musical talent or the best voice. And but he liked, I guess, like we were talking about, who was our second person? Andy,
today?
Was it Fletcher? Yeah, Andy Fletcher.
In the music,
he didn't consider himself the best talent that way, but he was big. He was good looking. He was funny, and he had a pretty good voice. But he considered himself an entertainer rather than a musician.
Well, what he had was confidence. I mean, did you see the 2 stories that you talked about him appearing with 4 black guys? he was in the audience at a show with Fletcher Club, and he got up, spontaneously walked up from the audience and started singing with them, and they let him. And he eventually,
and he did it a lot.
But eventually formed a group with these guys. I mean,
yep.
You know, when they were talking about Hank Williams was too drunk to appear, and he got up on stage and started performing at a Hank Williams show. That just takes chutzpah and nerves of steel, you know. Yep. But in addition to that, he was a hard worker. I mean, he had a newspaper route while he performed. He ran bootleg liquor,
right, and also,
and started clubs,
right. And you know, and like we were saying with Fletcher, who was 15, Hawkins was 16 years old when he started entertaining.
Yeah, it just impresses the hell out of me. Now, again, he had that foot in the door. He had more than a foot in the door to get into the business, but it takes more than a foot in the door to succeed. And I
agree.
He innovated. He performed. Now, apparently he had some bad investments, but he was continuously expanding and growing his businesses.
Yeah, he kind of took the flops, like, okay, well, next.
He became a professional drummer in a matter of a few days to appear again and again. He worked with people like Roy Orbison, for crying out loud, and Jerry Lee Lewis, and then brought country rock essentially to Canada and became one of the most dominant performers in Canada for many years till near when he died. Bob Dylan cast into play Bob Dylan in the movie Ronaldo and Clara. I mean, this is a guy who established himself in the industry and worked with the greats of the greats. He was part of the last waltz, as we were talking about. Robbie Robertson gives him huge credit for that.
That's right.
He didn't get deeply involved in the drug scene, but it seemed like he didn't ignore it completely. He didn't let it dominate him.
Nope.
And then he continued to perform. He recovered from cancer in 2003 and performed, for many, many years after that. Yep. And then died of the cancer at age 87 on May 29th.
Right.
And again, a guy got into the business early.
Yep.
Stayed with the business and was married. He survived his wife, Wanda, married 60 years. These are three guys in rock that we have featured today
that were not
been with their wives for decades.
Yep.
And I just, like I said, that always means something to me. So again, this is three guys who I really never heard of, who I have just nothing but the utmost admiration and respect for.
Yeah.
Because I got to be honest with you, if I was in the music business, I would be Andy Fletcher. I would be the guy who does the jack of all trades.
So they are, just like I used to say when I went to Morrow and I was looking to have a career in television production, my idea was that I wanted to be famous for people within the industry. Like if they wanted somebody to do amazing camera work, go get me Sharon Yanklowitz. I could care less if anybody in the public knew who I was, but I wanted to be known in the industry. Now, my personal life sort of got in the way of that goal, so it never happened, but that's what I feel like these guys represent. They're probably like what they call musicians, like just people in the industry absolutely know who they are, and we don't. And well, we sort of do a little bit now.
Sharon, why don't we wrap up this week with two slightly different stories? A part of our childhood is coming to an end finally. Many people probably thought it had ended a long time ago. But upstate New York, the last of the Howard Johnson restaurants.
Right.
Which were around for about 10 or 15 years before we were born.
Did you call it a HoJo?
HoJos. Everybody called it HoJos. And when he played third base for the Mets, he was called HoJo.
That's right. And he was part of that family, right?
No, I don't think so.
He wasn't? It was a coincidence?
Although I don't understand how somebody, if he played for the Mets in 1986, he was probably born in 1960 or so. Mm-hmm. How do you name your kid after
a restaurant?
It's like naming a kid Ronald McDonald. I'm sorry.
Right.
I don't get that. But in any event, Howard Johnson's, which was famous for its burgers and its multi-flavors of ice cream before Baskin Robbins made it a big.
Let me tell you this, too. Because, when I was working in the city and it was Passover, there was no place I could get matzo ball except for Howard Johnson's.
Now, that amazes me. Yeah, I didn't realize they had a prominent location on Times Square.
Yeah, they did.
That's the end when that closed. I would not have remembered.
And every Passover they had matzo brie, and I used to go in there for lunch and have matzo brie for lunch. So
the name lives on.
Really go. Mm-hmm.
The name lives on because the hotel aspect of it has long been separated from the restaurant aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And Howard Johnson's is a sub-brand in the Wyndham hotel chain. So
I didn't think it was around anymore. Okay.
Yeah, the hotel brand Wyndham's Howard Johnson's is still fairly substantial, but it's nothing to do with the restaurant chain and hasn't for many, many years, right? More than 30 years. But the last Howard Johnson's, apparently that land the lease is being sold for $10. There's got to be something going on there.
Oh goodness! And where is that?
Lake George, New York, upstate New York.
Oh,
upstate. Way upstate New York. Yeah. I don't think that's that far from Cooperstown, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, when you told me it's on the way. But when you told me about this, I'm like, oh, I didn't know there were any left.
Yeah. That's a little bit off the beaten path, if you will.
Yeah.
I don't know what the ones before that, last ones before that were.
Right. Well, so the last story is something.
Well, just one other thing about Howard Johnson.
Okay.
It was part of a very famous early funny scene in Blazing Saddles, where Howard Johnson was one of the town members, and they were all named Johnson, and they just riffed off that. Go ahead. Let's talk about our last story for the show, for today's show.
Yeah. So you brought up a story about bullying. You brought up this story, and it's usually something I would come up with. It's got a nice sort of feel-good story about it. And I was thinking, okay, why does Mark want to do this? So basically, it's about a 12-year-old boy who was graduating, and nobody wanted to sign his yearbook. And he'd come home, and he'd cry, and his mother was like, what's going on? And he's like, I asked everybody in my class to sign my yearbook, and nobody wanted to sign it. And some kids actually said no. It turns out this kid is one of these awkward kids. It sounds like he's a very intelligent boy, loves chess and loves to read. He's very intellectual. And, you tend to tease kids like that because they're sort of nerdy. And one of the quotes that I saw was they said that they tease him and say his ears stick out and that he's extremely thin. Only 2 teachers in total and 2 students signed his yearbook. And she was heartbroken.
Did you see he signed his yearbook, and did you see what he wrote?
So he decided, because nobody would sign his book, he kind of wrote a little note to himself. My heart is shattered. Teach your kids kindness.
No, he didn't write that. His mother wrote. Yeah, he wrote, hope you make some more. He wrote his own yearbook, hope you make some more friends. Brody Ritter.
She wrote on Facebook that, to like a parent association or on a parent's school's page, the school page of Facebook for the school, my heart is shattered. Teach your kids kindness. And kind of told about what had happened. And she just felt like putting it out there, really didn't think anything would come of it. And the next day, the kid texted her, and he was thrilled. He sent a picture along with messages and signatures from like people were standing in line to sign his book.
It seems several kids, older kids, 15, 16-year-olds.
Yeah, the 11th graders.
You know, with some with a push from their parents, but several independently decided they were going to make this kid's day. And they got their friends together and they just bombarded his classroom.
Yeah, and then and like he said, that even some of them left their phone numbers in his book so they could keep in touch. The thing is, so Brody couldn't stop smiling. You know, a little kindness goes such a long way. And so I think where this story fits into our show is a good example of how to stop the end of bullying, right? And our show is about endings, right? And in the long of the short of it, right? Somebody passes away or business goes out of business, you know, the last one is gone, something ended. So I think this is a good story.
We have done, unfortunately, too many stories of kids who have killed themselves. And we haven't done the stories so much. But there have been stories in the news where the kid who goes in with the AR-15 into the school was bullied as a youngster. And I'm not saying, believe me, I'm not saying that this young man would have done either of it.
Right.
But if you see...
it's a type that's where that can go. If
you see more kids stepping up when they see a kid either being bullied, you know, and they step up on their own and say, we're going to help this kid. If that happens consistently across the board, I guarantee you, fewer kids are going to find themselves in a position where they feel they have no other way out except for committing suicide. And hopefully fewer kids find themselves allowing their state of mind to deteriorate where they feel they have to take others with them. It can only make that, you know, you don't see, you look at a story like this, and if this story hopefully is repeated thousands of times or more, you won't see the kids who would have and didn't do something terrible, but hopefully you will see a tremendous drop in the number of incidents. Of
stories like that.
You know, this becomes a thing.
Even the kid that did the shooting in Buffalo, he's only 18 years old.
And to their credit, several of his classmates who had refused to signed and apologized. So this doesn't just have a positive effect on this 12-year-old boy, Brody. Maybe it has a positive impact on these kids who thought it was okay to exclude somebody else. It's like bringing 29 Valentine's Day cards when there's 30 other kids in the class and excluding the one. So maybe these kids in general will be nicer to others. So it's not only making the life better for Brody. Maybe these kids have now changed their outlook on perspective on life. And I just think it fits in our umbrella.
And I'm glad that you found it and wanted to do it.
And I'm glad that you agreed. Sharon, I think that brings us to, almost the end of this week's Over the Rainbow, because we can't end it without one more thing.
Which is what? Promoting our May York site?
Well, we got that, and then soon to be our Junior site. But there's something about promises made and promises kept.
Oh, right. Yes, we must, because over and over again, we talk about how we lose people, whether it be by natural causes or not. You should show your love for those you care for today, because they may not be here tomorrow. But we're hoping hoping you'll be here tomorrow, and we're hoping you'll be here for our next episode of Over the Rainbow.
Thank you for listening, and Sharon, thank you for sharing this week with me and finding some really interesting stories that will stick with me.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good day.